Hey guys, so today we're gonna be going to China as we study about Wu Zetian. I'm just gonna call her Wu. Again, I've always been nervous about covering more Chinese history because I know I probably won't pronounce anything correctly, but I'm just gonna call her Wu, who was the Empress of China. Now, my only exposure to this person is that it's in that video. I think it was from what, chat history, evil queens and evil things they did, and she was actually on that video, and she like murdered her baby in it. I think this is the same person. And yeah, that's probably my only impression of her. So I think we're gonna follow someone who can be pretty ruthless and who's gonna play the game of politics. Again, we don't really cover much women on this channel, huh? I guess in history it's a lot of guys. So it's gonna be interesting to follow, a woman, um, in a series and just kind of see like what she accomplished, other than the whole baby killing thing. If this is the same person, that is. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than I'm really looking forward to covering a bit more about what's going on in China at this point. Yeah, let's get to it, shall we? Let's watch part 1 of the Empress Wu series by Extra History, hated by gods and men.
Chang'an, China, 684 CE. Dowager Empress Wu orders the nervous messenger to read the letter aloud before the entire court. It's from a poet who has joined a rebellion against her. It describes and denounces Wu. It details how she rose from a low-level concubine to be the power behind the imperial throne, ruling through a series of puppet emperors. She used her fox-like charms to delude the emperor, he reads. She finally was able to put on an empress's clothes and put our emperor in a position of committing incest. She nods for him to continue. He does, shaking. She has a heart like a snake and a lizard, and a disposition similar to a wolf. She is close to insidious individuals and murders the faithful and the good. She killed her sister, slaughtered her brothers, murdered her emperor, and poisoned her mother. Both gods and men hate her, and heaven and earth cannot allow her to exist. The throne room falls silent. Wu accepts the letter, scanning it. Then she laughs, and turning to her advisors, shoots them a look. "This is your fault," she says, waving the letter. "You should have hired him to work for us."
Alright, took that in stride, huh? I thought like I was ready for like a crash out or something, but I guess you gotta have somewhat of a sense of humor, eh? That was an interesting reaction, I have to say.
Thanks so much to GiveWell for helping everyone find highly effective charities and making sure our donation dollars go further. Empress Wu Zetian, or Wu Zhao, to use the name she called herself, is one of the most fascinating and dramatic characters in world history. Entering the imperial court as a 14-year-old concubine, she began a meteoric rise through the ranks of the emperor's harem to capture the heart of the man's heir and rule as co-monarch through a series of weak emperors. There, she served as a stable force amid changeable and often incompetent rulers, steering the Tang dynasty through the period of its greatest glory. Her administrative reforms and sponsorship of the new foreign religion of Buddhism permanently changed China and helped the dynasty endure another 200 years after her death. But her greatest achievement, what makes her so notable, is that she is the only woman in history to rule China not as a regent or through a weak monarch, but under her own name. And this was so unprecedented that
That really is. Like I said, I think in just history in general, like at least all the videos we've seen, like women don't really like have like high positions of power. I'm not saying there hasn't ever been, it's just like through a lot of history, it's usually men who are taking the lead. So it's always unique when you see like, like a woman kind of in charge for the most part. It's always like I said, unique. And again, like Buddhism and what that's interesting. It's gonna be like, I think this series is definitely gonna be I wonder how they're gonna portray Empress Wu. Probably more positive, I'd imagine, than Jet history. I mean, I don't know if she actually did murder her baby, but if she did, like, oh snap. I'm wondering if that's gonna show up, because that's all I know. But yeah.
There's actually no word for the role she took. See, the Chinese word for empress just means the emperor's wife. Wu Zhao, by contrast, is known as the female emperor, a state of affairs that some at the time considered against nature. In the 7th century, China was a land ruled by Confucianism. While the common people practiced Taoism, folk beliefs, and the newly arrived faith of Buddhism, the ruling class adhered to the teachings of Kongfu, or Master Kong, a 6th century BCE scholar, whose name Jesuit missionaries later Latinized into Confucius. And the thing about Confucianism is that it had a hard lock on the minds of court officials. To serve the court was to be a Confucian scholar. It was the organizing principle of imperial power. That's significant, because Confucianism is a religion, or a moral system, or maybe a humanist philosophy. It's sort of hard to tell. Anyway, the important thing is that it's based in organizing society around hierarchical relationships. Fathers rank above sons, older siblings rank above younger ones, lords above vassals, etc. And crucially, wives were supposed to be quiet, obedient supporters of their husbands and yield control to adult sons. As a result, Empress Wu's time in power and her success as a ruler threatened the Confucian scholars who went on to write the official histories of her reign, which, as you can imagine, creates a problem for today's scholars, particularly since Chinese official histories weren't also really interested in recording truth. Rather, they were meant to be moral instructive narratives for future rulers. And the narrative they built around Wu was, oh, this is why you never let a woman have power.
This may be the last ad you ever see.
Histories of Wu villainize her as a monster, a treacherous plotter who manipulated her way into power via sex and assassination, then slaughtered her political opponents in mass executions. A vile usurper who killed off 12 lines of her own family tree. But many of those stories are likely exaggerated or even invented. The most infamous accusation, that she supposedly had her rivals' hands and feet lopped off before throwing them into a vat of wine to drown, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll get there in Ep 2, was clearly lifted from an earlier story. Of course, that doesn't mean that she was nice. The imperial court, including the harem, was a dangerous place. And Wu was a ruthless participant in its games of power, where intrigue, slander, assassination, sex, and outright murder all played a part in advancement. Of course.
Alright, that's interesting. I think the aspect of slander has kind of come into place. You know, I kind of heard this about in terms of like Roman emperors. Like, for instance, like the likes of Elagabalus, for instance. A lot of people will say that often Roman emperors, especially the worst ones, some of their more outrageous exploits were kind of like invented, or that there was slander, you know, and that sometimes it kind of kept going, especially I think with like Tiberius and whatnot. Some of the sources about some of his more wild behavior I've heard has been challenged as if probably exaggeration. So it's interesting. I mean, obviously, I think I've kind of looked into the court life of. There's this video called "Why It Sucks to Be a Concubine," your life as a concubine or something. So like, if that video, what I saw on my own free time, is historically accurate at all, then yeah, being a concubine wasn't a fun life for women, and that there was a lot of like maneuvering, and you kind of had to be ruthless to get by. So I'm wondering how extra history is gonna portray Empress Wu, if like what is more likely, what is more unlikely. Like I said, all I've heard is tales of more. Oh snap! I just snapped. More tales of her cruelty. So I'm really looking forward to this series, seeing how my perspective will change, or him trying to debunk anything. Especially that baby one that I keep bringing up. I'm wondering. I would like if that wasn't like accurate, but I don't know. I guess we'll see, huh?
When used by male emperors, these were seen as just necessary tools of state that brought no dishonor. But the young girl who arrived at court in 637 was not yet familiar with these royal tools. Indeed, her bloodline was quite common. Her father was wealthy, a lumber merchant who by happenstance became friendly with a provincial officer who would later lead a rebellion, topple the Sui dynasty, and make himself emperor as the founder of the Tang dynasty. Wu's father likely assisted with that rebellion, since the new emperor made him a governor, granting him aristocratic status. Young Wu benefited from the liberal nature of the new dynasty, where roles for women were expanding, because while Confucianism held women in a lesser role, it did also encourage female education, and Wu's father provided her with an unusually broad base in literature, rhetoric, music, and politics. Yet it was her looks that got her noticed. For at the age of 14, she won what has been called the largest beauty pageant ever conducted.
Oh, wow.
The survey for the imperial harem, which meant that by Tang standards, she was very, very attractive. She went to the palace to serve Emperor Taizong, a man who had secured the throne by killing 2 of his brothers in a sword fight after one had poisoned him. Yet she would have to do more than look pretty.
That was kind of metal, what the heck?
While it is true that concubines, lesser wives of the emperor, existed to fulfill his sexual desires and produce children, they also did everything needed to maintain the emperor's personal quarters. Men were banned there, so the concubines worked in a sort of shadow bureaucracy, with 9 ranks divided by their role. The primary wife, the emperor consort, was on the first rank, the favorites on the second rank, and on down to concubines who helped with bathing, serving food, or as secretaries. Lady Wu was made a 5th rank concubine, essentially a chambermaid, responsible for changing Emperor Taizong's bed linen. A mid-ranking duty, but one with a certain hint at intimacy that her enemies would later make a great deal out of, suggesting that Wu was secretly Emperor Taizong's favorite. The truth was, as usual, a bit more complicated than that. Throughout her life, Wu would go back and forth on whether she and Taizong ever slept together, depending on what version was expedient at the time. Realistically, the 40-year-old Taizong probably slept with her a couple of times, as it was common, but according to Wu's own account later in life, he seemed to find her a little unnerving. Her big moment with him came one night as he relaxed with his concubines, discussing his favorite subject, his horses. Oh, Taizong loved his horses more than anything. They'd been his mounts as a young warrior, and he took more joy in them than even his own children. But there was one horse, a new one, which just couldn't be broken for riding.
I could break him,
Wu said.
I would need 3 things: an iron whip, an iron mace, and a dagger.
Amused, Taizong asked her how she would do it.
I will whip him,
She said with ice in her voice.
If he does not submit, I will strike him in the head with a mace. If he still does not submit, I will take the dagger and slit his throat.
According to Wu, Taizong was impressed by her fortitude, but probably not exactly turned on. Then, 11
Yeah, especially for a guy who likes his horses. But I think that's a pretty cool antidote. Probably goes to show that, oh, that's an interesting story there. Probably gonna go to show that, with her, you probably are either gonna fall in line or just straight up be killed. So that's probably a good insight into her character.
years into Wu's tenure at the palace, when Taizong was dying, she was still a 5th-rank concubine, changing his sheets and nursing him in his final days. Not really a sign of good favor. Soon, Taizong would die, his body taken to the elaborate tomb made for him, its entrance flanked by enormous statues of his favorite horses. Wu and her fellow childless concubines would then enter a Buddhist nunnery where they would spend the rest of their lives praying for Taizong's soul. Except that a very special visitor came to the deathbed, Taizong's son, soon to be known as Emperor Gaozong, a 21-year-old who likely had grown up with a bit of a schoolboy crush on the beautiful Wu, who was 3 years his senior. But they could never be, as any relationship between them would have been considered incest. And yet, Wu really didn't want to go to that nunnery. After he used the toilet, Wu held out a bowl for him to wash his hands in. Once he'd finished, he flicked them dry, spraying water on her face. Perhaps an accident, perhaps a flirtation. But without missing a beat, she looked up to him and said,
I accept heaven's favor of rain and mist.
which is 17th century harem speak for, oh, I'm into it, kid. Let's do this. And, speaking of things...
Heck yeah. Alright, you gotta do what you gotta do, man. That's wild. I didn't know that could be flirtation. Imagine just throwing like a bottle of water at someone. Gonna try that. No, don't. But, that's interesting. To be fair, I don't blame her. Like, the nunnery doesn't sound like a fun life, huh?
That you can do. No, not like that. Get your minds out of the gutter. We're gonna be talking about giving to charity here. Jeez. Thanks so much to GiveWell for helping to make our charitable choice.
Alright, so that was an interesting first part. I'm actually looking forward to watching the rest of this series and seeing just how it like evolves. So I'll see you guys tomorrow in part 2.